literally only 2 or 3 blocks away from where the protest was, where a cop car got lit on fire, where there was violence, where where we were pushing against the police because the police was pushing against us. The police grabbed this one girl and started beating her right in the street. So it was crazy to me to see that on the way to the protest, and it really was heartbreaking to see that.
And thank you for sharing that, Sequoia. Sydney, I want to ask you a similar question, specifically at a protest that you organized. When you organized protests, did it ever turn violent for you? If it did, how were you able to handle that? Or what do you think were some things, whether at the protests you organized, the ones that you've been to, that kind of incited a more violent outturn?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, and I think I will answer it probably not in the way like that I would expect to when I hear an answer to this question, but I still think I'm trying to be like as accurate of a reflection of what this experience has been like organizing things as possible. And so I think my first large rally or action that I organized was in the beginning of June. It was a demand for police accountability in Chicago. And in the midst of the protest, myself and 3 others had organized it together. Me, 2 of my other good sisters who I love and work with dearly, Imani and Kristen, and another person who I will not name. And the other person who we ended up organizing the march with was a man, and in the heat of the action, ended up actually putting his hands on 2 of us and assaulting us. And that was a situation that was very hard to manage because in the midst of this happening between the few of us in the front of the march, there's thousands of people behind us following us. We're marching south down Cottage Grove. But it's a moment when you have to remember that we all have very different stakes in this demand for police accountability, for justice. And to be candid, my stakes in the reality of like violence of the police are not always as I'm not nearly as targeted oftentimes as Black men, and that's just a reality. And so while it is uncomfortable to be in these moments when there's no answers for why people react in certain ways, I think that is oftentimes more so symptomatic of the fact that we are not given justice in any way, shape, or form in life. And people are not entitled to put their hands on other people. But the fact of the matter is when you are creating these types of social actions and you are bringing multiple, sometimes just a handful, sometimes thousands of people together, you do not have control over everyone else's actions, and you have to understand the responsibility that you have regardless of that when you do bring these types of actions together, and you have to understand the types of sentiments and emotions that you're going to drum up in other people, because it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable reasons why we are coming together. It's because we are being murdered and beat. It's going to bring sometimes ugliness out of people in different ways, and it's just something that it's an unfortunate instance that obviously a lot of organizers have to deal with, interpersonal feuding and fighting and stuff like that in the midst of trying to create broader actions.
And I think something you said, symptom, like I know, Jon, you and I, we were discussing something before. Can you kind of reiterate that symptom aspect of what happens?
Yeah, I think what happens is when you, like, really and truly, and this is just me speaking from my personal experience, but when creating anything that is similar to a protest or a march, or getting that type of, like, really curating that type of energy in a large body of people, like I was trying to say before, it creates for unprecedented circumstances, and especially for Black people who have had to suffer at the hands of the violence of state powers and every other type of white supremacist institution for centuries. It's really like an ancestral, like very deep trauma that everyone that is attending these actions has a different stake in. And especially for Black people, it's painful in ways that we might not even be able to understand or put words to oftentimes. And that's, I think, while it is an important symptom of, like, these feelings have to be acknowledged, I don't think necessarily they have to be acknowledged in the way that predicates itself on so much Black suffering as it now is. Like, it's just disgusting. It makes your stomach hurt sometimes to see the types of violence and trauma and sadness that these types of actions bring out in people when people are really mourning in the streets. And I think that it's really hard to sometimes make sense of or just be able to come back from.
Yeah, and like you said, these actions are result of mourning and people trying to let out their anger and their frustration with centuries and centuries of violence committed against them in the Black community. And the thing about symptoms is that they tell you that there is something wrong going on in your body. And right now, America is sick. And there is something wrong going on in the body of America. And symptoms aren't comfortable. Symptoms aren't something that, are pleasant. That's why you try to seek to get rid of them. The symptoms hurt. Symptoms keep you up at night. Symptoms are very, very, very uncomfortable. And right now, America is dealing with a very uncomfortable symptom.
Racism.
Period. But I think America is really getting conflated here. What is the symptom and what is the illness? And right now, you have to cure the illness. Racism is the illness. The riots are just symptoms.
And I think also it's very hard to try to tell people how to react, because that was always my thing when it came to discussing the riots, is I always felt like, Black people built this country. That's why I feel like, Black people have done nothing but build this country for free with nothing but, and all we got in return was being torn away from our families, being separated, never seeing children again, everything. And I think then these structures that are still in place, the fact that we still had statues of, racist leaders. We had army bases named after racist leaders. We are harming Black and brown people across seas. And now you have these symbols in front of us of all of these things we've done to provide a world in which we're not able to take part in. Those symbols become very violent to us. And then, like you said, those riots are a symptom and they're a reaction. And at the end of the day, those riots is what got the attention of people to even put our protests on the news. There are still protests going on today, and they're not even showing them on the news anymore. You know what I'm saying? So it was like, we do it, there's no right way to protest. Colin Kaepernick kneeled for how long? And they blackballed that man in the business, threw him out, fired him, would not let him even have a life because he wanted to have an opinion about things that affected his life. And so then, you come up with just, people want to be like, oh, I respect the protests, only the peaceful protests. Well, you know what? I respect the riots too, because you know what? It is symbolic. And what do people respect? They respect currency. Government is going to treat currency over people. Time and time again, the government has constantly shown that monuments, money, trade, power, a feeling of instilling power, that's all that war is more important than the well-being of its people. So how do you get a structure like that's attention? By asking for humanity, by pleading to its humanity, by coming out and just begging for some form of humanity, you can't expect humanity from a non-humane system. So you have to respond to that system in the language that it understands, which may be through taking forms in currency, taking objects. I'm sorry, but a Gucci store, which has insurance to cover its $1,000 hairpin, means nothing to me compared to someone's life, someone's son, someone's father, someone's cousin, someone's friend, someone's Boy Scout leader. I don't care who they were. Someone who just gave you candy on the bus one day. That person who is interlooped with many lives means more to me than the form of currency that this government holds on a pedestal. So I think more than anything, yes, it is a symptom, but it is a symptom that the doctors of this illness take serious. That's the only symptom they want to take serious.
I completely agree with what you said, and I think what you said ties perfectly to this quote by Ta-Nehisi Coates he had written in this essay called Nonviolence as Compliance. And what he says is, when nonviolence begins halfway through the war with the aggressor calling time out, it exposes itself as a ruse. This nonviolence, like we said, did not arise out of nowhere. It's a reaction. The real violence has been committed way before the protests and riots even began. It started centuries ago. And I want to, because the vice presidential debate started days ago, I want to pull a quote from Mike Pence when he was asked about justice for Breonna Taylor. And what he said was, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd, but there's no excuse for the rioting and looting that followed. Now, I'm going to give a quick grammatical lesson. But when you use the word but, everything that preceded that but is negated. And usually, when you use the word but, it says that what follows the but is the more important part. So when he said there's no justice, there's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd, but there's no excuse for the rioting, like you said, it just demonstrates the hierarchy and the putting of white interests over black lives constantly, over and over again. Over and over again. And I feel like that's just a perfect analogy to how the riots are being used just in the broader media. It's completely racialized and dismissive. When the attention is being taken from the injustices against the black community and being placed on the riots, it totally dismisses and negates the fight for black lives. And it says that what is more important than black lives is property, is currency, is the CVS down the road. That's more important than the black lives being lost in the streets day in and day out.
And to add on to that, and also to kind of move into our next question, Sequoia, I really like that you use the term doctors, which I thought was really interesting, the doctors of the illness, as if this illness was curated, which it was, what I'm saying? It was man-made, what I'm saying? And I believe her name is Kimberly Jones. I don't know if y'all saw that video that kind of went semi-viral that ended with, "You're lucky what we're looking for is equality and not revenge." But in it, and the part that gets cut off, is also this talk about economics, how slavery was born from an economic gain, and also how you ask why, okay, so why do we have protesters burning up these buildings or looting at these stores? Why do we have people going into their own neighborhoods and destroying it? She makes the argument that none of this is ours to begin with, that this belongs to them. This belongs to the people that don't look out for us. So a question that I have for y'all, especially because, Sydney, I know you said, we all are reacting to this with different levels, that, especially when it comes to policing, it's a different experience for black men than it is for black women. So I'm curious, what are the reasons that you all protest personally? And also, what are ways